welcome to the Pink Parley. It's your motherfucking host, Molly. And first off, I would like to give a special shout out to Xavier on the Nun But Greatness Podcast. I figured that in order to gain support and network, a great place for me to start would be Facebook, and since they have many podcaster groups. One of the first guys to connect with me on Facebook is Xavier, so shout out to him. I love what he's doing, his humor, and he's definitely bringing vibes that I fuck with on the show. So also, I would love to thank you guys again for all the love that I've been receiving from you guys, the downloads, the 5 stars, the comments, everything. I appreciate it so much, and only if I receive the same love from my crusty ass grandma. Yes, today's show we are getting into her, how your blood can become your worst enemy, life in the group home, DCFS, and the unbelievable shit she is doing with my child. So roll up if you smoke, sip your drink if you drink, and you have to live the life of sobriety, then just listen to this realness I'm finna give y'all, okay? Have y'all ever had someone in your family hate on you so hard? It's one thing if it's maybe your cousin or something hating on you, but when the hatred is coming from the own people that raised you, that hatred is so close to home that it can become a huge hindrance in your life. Now, I don't know why my grandmother has always been a hater, but it has to stem from somewhere, right? All I know about my grandma's childhood is that she was biracial, half white, and most likely black. My grandmother never knew her father, but considering the kinky curly hair she was born with and having full lips gave clues that her father was black. Back in the 40s, 50s era, this was taboo like a motherfucker. Not only was her Caucasian mother fucking black men, she was also a heroin-addicted prostitute who bared many children. My grandmother felt she had to be there for her little siblings as they sat in the house with nothing to eat but chocolate cream pies and shit that junkies eat. My grandmother didn't live there long, and she was sent off to a boarding school. And I know even though this gave her a better life, she was sad she had to leave her little sisters behind in a prostitute junkie house. The nuns were very strict and would beat the shit out of her. Once she was out of boarding school, she moved in with her aunt. Her aunt had money, class, and expensive taste. In fact, my grandmother looked a mess. Her front teeth were busted out. She wore dark, cheap eyeliner that was deeply smudged around her eyes. She wore hand-me-down clothes, and her hair was wild and unkempt. Aunt Lyle made her up, got her teeth done, taught her fashion and how to dress, took her to a black salon to get her hair done, and taught her everything about being a classy woman, from drinking the finest brew to fine dining. It seems this is when my grandmother's life changed for the better. And from there, she would start working for Red Cross and eventually become a nurse and have 2 children with my grandfather, and been through 5 marriages. In comparison to my life, I think my grandma lived pretty good, honestly. At least she had somebody that not only saved her, but bossed her up too. So I'm still puzzled, but I'm sure she has hatred for women. And I know the last time she did see her mother was shocked. When she told her she was a nurse, her mother just said, "Oh, I thought you were just gonna be a prostitute." I know those words hurt my grandmother bad, because I don't think my grandmother ever talked to her mother again after that. How was my grandmother as a parent? Well, my grandma would swear she was something decent. But from what I hear, she would snort mountains of cocaine, do acid and speed, and drink excessively. In fact, my aunt recalls the time she thought the white cocaine was a pile of sugar and she tasted it. So do you think that's fit parenting, leaving lethal doses of cocaine around your 2 children? Definitely DCFS should have ran through that hippie-ass boogie-woogie party house and got those kids. However, back in those days, DCFS wasn't so quick to take your children away. My grandma and grandpa were together for 20 years and they weren't even in love. They spent 20 years sitting in a house full of silence for majority of the time, or my grandpa would start tripping off the crack when he would start smoking and be ready to line it up with not only her, but their 2 daughters too. Eventually, my grandma left him, moved to LA with their 2 daughters, and shortly after, the baddest bitch was born. So if I told you guys before in previous episodes, my mother was not a fit parent, and just seeing her background, I could understand why. My grandmother ended up taking custody of me by the time I was 3 years old. I remember being so close to my grandma. In fact, I used to scream bloody murder whenever I had to get dropped back off of my mom. My mom would have to fight with me and drag me all the way to her dark, dingy, dirty apartment. Now, going back to my grandmother's past, I do feel part of her wants to protect children, and this can all stem from when she had to be protective of her little sisters. So although at this time my grandma was married to a tall, buff, chocolate handsome man, her protective spirit just couldn't allow the neglect and recklessness from my mother to go on much longer. So my grandmother took the custody of me, and it seems like shortly after her decision to do that, her marriage started to go into shambles. Yes, she blames me for her divorce, and from there, that's when I think the hatred for me began. My grandmother never dated or even had sex with any other man after that. Again, I'm not too sure why, but that was her 5th and final marriage, and she didn't care to date any other men ever again. By the time I was 5, it was pretty much just me, my grandma, and my aunt. My grandma is financially reckless, so through that we experienced a lot of ups and downs, having a place to stay one moment, then sleeping on my aunt's floor in South Central the next. My aunt is my grandma's favorite daughter. She hates my mom, by the way, and doesn't want anything to do with her. While I'll be alone with my aunt, she will call me ugly or just pick on me about my body because I've always been curvy with a little booty, even as a child. And mind you, my auntie ass is flatter than a pancake. But over the decades, I began to be fearful of my aunt, and I felt I had to walk on eggshells around her. Then it seemed like the older I got, the even more developed my body got. It was like my grandma started hating on me more too. I remember always overhearing their conversations. They didn't even realize I was listening in on they hating asses. But I remember my grandma blaming me for her divorce, her being fat, her being depressed, and meanwhile my aunt pumping her head up, calling me hoes and nasty, who 15-year-old me was a virgin and an honor student, by the way. But my achievements in school never mattered. In fact, it was hated on. My grandma, my mom, my aunt are all very slow women. Academics was just never their thing. So they would hate on me that I had good grades or feel like I was trying to prove I was better than them or something. Like, I don't know, it was just weird, y'all. By the time I was 14, my grandma started kicking me out. But once my friend's mom reported her to DCFS, she was forced to take me back in until she decided she would throw me in a group home and act like I never even existed. I remember the group home being like a culture shock as far as how I saw women, because I swear these group home bitches was some of the nastiest, most trifling bitches I ever met. There was all walks of life walking through that bitch, with most girls being in the foster care system their entire lives, moving from one placement to the next. There were girls that were mentally crazy and would smear their feces all over the wall. There were girls that were addicted to drugs and was turning other girls out on crack and heroin. There were girls that were prostitutes, girls that would cut themselves deeply, as we were all just standing there watching the blood gush out their wrists. And there were girls with cases so fucked up, it couldn't even be talked about. Woo! What a difference in environments. But I've always adapted to every situation I've ever been thrown into. So I began to like the group home, even more than home. I got to know each one of the girls and fought a few of them, I ain't gonna lie. But overall, I had some funny ass moments there. Mind you, this was a group home that wasn't strictly locked down. However, that didn't mean we couldn't just leave either. But you think that let us stop us? No. We would run away from the group home all the time, hop on that gold line train for free, and be out that bitch every chance we got. I remember the time me, my one and only stud girlfriend, and this other weird bitch runs away, or what they would call AWOLs, to go steal some Four Logos. Now back then, these was the OG Four Logos. The ones that used to have motherfuckers so fucked up that they had to ban them. Yeah, we talking about them Four Logos. I remember we stole about 6 cans and we all chugged them to the head before returning back to the group home. From there, I don't remember much at all. All I remember is me and my stud girlfriend making out and her fingering me while we laid it on the lawn in front of everybody. Staff, roomies, and all. I remember everything getting black, then I remember waking up in the hospital. I don't know what type of shit was in the Four Logos, but that was a wild time. Or my other AWOL with one of my roommates. My roommate was a quiet, cute little white girl, and I remember we AWOL and we met these random ass guys and we just took off with them. As we riding with them, they started talking about ecstasy. Now mind you, I was always an introverted nerd that was cool as shit, but besides a little bit of weed, I had never in my life played around with drugs. I found out my roommate wanted some damn heroin. Thank God the motherfuckers didn't have the plug on that shit, because who knows, maybe I would have been so bored I would have tried it with her. But on this night, I was bored and tried the white Euro smacker ecstasy pill. When I tell y'all that was one of the best feelings in my life, like I never felt so euphoric and good. I just wanted to give love and hugs and rub on my body. Bitch, I was on. I didn't end up fucking those weird guys. In fact, luckily, they dropped us back off at the group home. And although I was safe, my love for ecstasy began. I couldn't wait for my next opportunity to try another one. While being in the group home, I couldn't get any more pills, but we was for sure having the weed. I would like to say RIP to my roommate. She ended up dying from an overdose not too long after her leaving the group home. She also had a little baby boy. And as far as my ex, I heard she got jumped so bad and she's been in a coma for like years. After turning 18, I was put in a temporary foster home with an elderly church-going woman named Miss Dixon. There at her home, I met my roommate. My roommate was African and had the biggest ass I ever saw, even to this day. So of course I had to fuck with her. And before I knew it, I discovered that she was an alcoholic and was fucking with a dude that had all the weed and pills. So boom, I could finally get my hands on ecstasy again, and I was in love. We used to pop pills and have threesomes with her dude at the time. Mind you, I was strongly lesbian for a good couple of years now, but that ecstasy had me so horny, I was ready to bust this tight coochie open. I don't know if my pH was more balanced than hers, but it went from a threesome to now we just in the bathroom fucking while she in the bed listening to love songs, heartbroken. In fact, I don't believe we ever kicked it with him again, and I felt a shift between me and my roommate after that day. I didn't know she had feelings for this guy. I mean, she shouldn't have, but nonetheless, we ended up going in different directions. I was kicked out of Miss Dixon's house and was homeless until I met my baby daddy shortly afterwards. My baby daddy also loved ecstasy very much and would keep me high and nasty. And I don't know what it was about those nights off a good one, off some drink and good weed, that seemed to just relax my uterus and ovaries so much. But it seemed like every time I would get pregnant. Thanks to me getting pregnant though, my grandmother decided to take me back in and come back in my life. I decided to keep my second pregnancy and go cold turkey from all drugs, alcohol, and weed, just 2 weeks into my pregnancy. And from there, I was off the streets and stayed with my grandmother. I did also spend my mid-pregnancy until the time I was due in a maternity shelter home in Compton. It was actually very nice there, and I regret coming home with my grandma to have my son. I honestly think if I would have been at the shelter, I would have kept the custody of my child. So on July 7th, 2012, I gave a cesarean birth to my 10.2, 22-inch long, massive son. I was in love with him. He gave me all the motivation and life purpose. In fact, I knew I didn't want to be on the bus with my child, so I used my back pay from Social Security to buy a car, and I had the foster care system pay for my driver's ed so I could learn how to drive. And just like that, I was a licensed driver, and I was able to take my baby to all his doctor's appointments in our own little car. I was enrolled at a community college where I would utilize the services the DCFS system had and use their child care services to help me with my son while I'll go to class. I didn't have everything together, but I was determined to make things right for me and my child. And I made sure my son never went without. I always budgeted each penny of my Social Security check and made sure my baby had the best clothes, toys, the best everything. I wanted to give him all the love my mother never did. For some reason though, I felt deep down inside my grandmother hated this bond I had with my son. I don't think she's ever been so engaged and involved with her children. And here I am taking my baby on walks to the library and doing story time with the babies. Like I was truly in love with being a mother. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Redondo Beach at the time. And with the already cramped space we had, my aunt decides to move in because she gets kicked out of her place again for having issues with the landlord. At this time in my aunt's life, she's been single for over 10 years, and one of her ex-thugs that was in the pen wanted to marry her. Y'all know how that shit be going. So now my stressed out aunt is stressing me out because she's just like, why can't you shut the baby up? And I'm trying to look beautiful for my wedding. I can't look beautiful with these big, huge bags under my eyes and blah, blah, blah. So this is just something a new and exhausted parent just isn't trying to hear. I decided to go with my homegirl who lives with her dad in LA with her son. They had a house, so it was considerably way more room than what I had in that cramped ass apartment. And from there, that's when I started catching hell from these bitches. As I'm breastfeeding my son and putting him to bed, I get a text on my phone saying, why don't you just drop your son off at the fire station? You're running the streets and you are on drugs. And I was just baffled as I read these outlandish messages to my homegirl. I'm like, what the fuck are these bitches talking about? Am I high? Like, obviously not. I'm trying to give my aunt peace so she can rest, and now I've just turned into a full-blown drug addict in their eyes. Mind you, my homegirl didn't do drugs or none of that. She was a mother too, just trying to take care of her son. One morning, I wake up to the worst day in my life. My baby daddy pops up on me and takes my phone. And all I wanted to do is get my breast pump from that apartment in Redondo because I was trying to eventually get my baby boy, who was fully breastfed, on the bottle so I could start working. I go over there and my aunt is there, but of course, my grandma is not. My aunt is on the phone with one of her low-life ass homegirls, basically saying it's always unfit bitches having babies. Maybe she was mad because she had STDs so bad at one point in time it burnt the living shit out of her sex organs to where she's sterile and can never have children again. Now that I'm older, I can see that maybe my aunt was jealous of my motherhood, but 19-year-old me was hot. And when she started yelling and waking up my son, and when I asked her to keep her voice down because she was waking up my baby and she said she didn't care, I lost it. I took off on her with the tightest ball fist I had and was just punching her giving her all the strength I had. I was thinking about how mean she's been to me for all the years, but how I'm not scared of her ass anymore. And now it's my time to fuck you up. And that's what I did. I remember I beat her until she was yelling at me to please stop. Once I realized what happened, I felt it was best for me to leave immediately. Only thing is, I left my car keys in the apartment, and now I can't go anywhere. She's laughing at me, mocking me as she's calling the police on me. And in seconds, Redondo Beach police shows up, takes me in for all the unpaid train tickets I had. And when they asked my aunt if they wanted to take my child while I went into custody, she said, no, take that baby. And just like that, I lost custody of my child. I never cried and screamed so much in my life. I'll never forget that day of me and my son leaving each other in separate police cars. Losing my son has been the hardest, most painful thing I ever went through. Not only did I lose my son, but since I blacked both my aunt's eyes and left a knot on her head, my grandma wasn't having it. My aunt is my grandma's favorite daughter, and she's gonna defend her regardless. So you think I could stay with my grandma anymore? No. And just like that, I lost the only thing I had in my life worth living for, and now I was homeless again. During this time, even though I was alive, I just felt lifeless. I was so devastated how quickly things turned, was worried about my child who was placed in a foster home and wasn't taken good care of. At the time, I ended up dating a guy that used to commit robberies. When I first met him, he was kind and was very generous with his money, and I fell for him because of that. But this guy also had a cocaine problem. So that's when I started having a cocaine addiction. We would literally ride around in his X5 through his hood and would chill and do powder with his homies all day and night. This dude would come up on all this money, but never got a place for us to stay in. We just stayed in rooms and at his people's house. The thing about dating a hood guy that's a flocker is everything is beautiful when there's money, but when that man's money starts to dwindle, that's when shit starts to get tricky. I remember when my boyfriend wouldn't have money, how mean he would treat me. I remember one day I was riding around with him and his homie, and he made me hop out of his car and walk down Western, which is a known hoe stroll in LA. I was humiliated. I never walked so fast in my life. He picked me up at the end of the block and was telling me how so many men was looking at me and how much money I could make, but I wasn't having it. As my man became more broke though, I couldn't help but to think of how much he's done for me. He would even let me use his car to go see my son since the engine blew on my little bucket I had. I truly appreciated him and figured, why not hold my man down? Honestly, it wasn't like I had a whole lot of pride in myself anyways after I lost my child. I couldn't even focus on starting school with everything that was going on. So I figured, why not try it? So I started working on the streets in hopes to make money. But honestly, I didn't make much. So me walking on the streets wasn't working for us. But of course, since this is LA and both my man and baby daddy were bloods, the word spread quickly to my baby daddy. Of course, everyone's messy ass made it seem like I was just down hoeing for this man, but it was never like that. I ended up breaking up with him. He took everything I had, including my phone, and from there I ended up staying with a drug man that would serve him. Staying with a dope dealer was a better situation for me, honestly, and that's where I learned all my hustle from. I know he wanted to fuck me, but he just wasn't my type. But he had my back a lot. He let me stay in his apartment for free. He even bought me clothes, food, and anything else I ever needed. And ultimately, he kept me a little high too. I just remember how numb the coke would make me in regards to the situation with my son. The whole thing just ate me alive. I just missed my child, couldn't believe how my family betrayed not only myself but my son in this way. And when I finally was able to have the DCFS monitor finally conduct the visits, I noticed my baby was so depressed, he wouldn't even smile or anything. It was the hardest thing to see, and it was all my fault. If I would have never put my hands on my aunt, this situation may have never happened. Thinking about this soberly made me want to die. Thinking about this on coke was sad, but in a numb way of sad. And to be honest, I think it's the only thing that made me want to live and move forward during this difficult time. I ended up being ordered to do random drug testing, which in most cases I would pass. But then it was a couple days after the 4th of July. I remember me and the homies all got loaded that night. And of course, I had to randomly test. And of course, I tested dirty. That dirty test ruined everything in this case. And yes, it was a huge mistake. But at this time, my grandma was finally able to get the custody of my baby. She struggled to get custody of him because when she kicked me out when I was 14, she was flagged with DCFS. So that part had me relieved. At least he can be with my grandma. At first, my grandma claimed I couldn't stay with her. But by the time my son was 2, I was cool with my grandma again, and I was able to stay with her and him. I was so relieved, and my life felt to come together again. At this time, I wasn't on coke anymore, and I was able to be a mom again with my son. I would take him out on activities every day. After I would pick him up from school, I would bathe him and put him to bed, and once he was in bed, I would get me a hotel room and post up escort ads. I was able to make a large amount of money quickly, so I was able to take care of my grandma, my son, and myself. Everything seemed to be going great between all of us, and I was really happy. My grandma even convinced me to close the case, which at the time seemed wise. I was with my baby every day, and I was told reopening the case and getting in the custody of my son would be easy to do. My baby daddy would even come over and see our son, or take him over to his grandpa's house where he would play with all his little aunts, uncles, and cousins. He was happy, and I was happy. Eventually, I did end sex work to get into my 4-year-long relationship, and it seems like this is when things turned for the worse. My grandmother does not like seeing a bitch get love. I guess because she hadn't had any love since her last husband, but she hated this guy. She even hated his son. Mind you, our boys were only a week apart and were inseparable. Like, they were besties for real. I remember one day my baby daddy calls me and says he has a relationship with his daughter now, and he would love for our son to meet her. I asked my grandmother if this would be okay with her, and she says yes, as usual. My baby daddy wanted to take my son over to his grandpa's house, and she's like, no. I don't know what made this time so different in comparison to any other time, but my baby daddy wasn't having it. He was like, what? This is my son. I can do whatever I want with him. Even though I knew he wasn't taking him, my grandmother's face looked broken. We didn't talk much after the incident, but I figured everything would boil over, for it wasn't such a big deal in my eyes. My ex would get random free tickets, and he had some tickets for a Clippers game. At this time, I was working full-time at Popeyes, so I wasn't able to go to the game, but I remember that my grandma was a huge Clippers fan at the time, so why not give her the 2 tickets? My ex told her to get to the game early because it was a big game and about the parking and to have cash for it, or he would even let her use his handicap placard so she wouldn't have to pay for parking. When I came home after my shift, I was shocked to see my grandma sitting on the couch in a house full of silence with her Clippers shirt on and her head down. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she showed up late, couldn't park because she didn't have any cash, so she was hurt that she couldn't go to the game. I didn't realize how much of a deal this was for her, but when I came home from work the next day, before I could even put my key in the door, I hear my grandmother on the phone talking to my aunt. I couldn't make out everything she was saying, but it was clear she was talking about me badly. My son, who was just learning how to be potty trained, was on the toilet yelling for her help, but this bitch was so busy talking about me, she was ignoring him. So I went in the house, cleaned my baby up, and I told him, I don't know what's about to happen, but I have a bad feeling. And the next day, when I put my key in the door, my key didn't work. She changed the locks on the door, and in fact, I later learned that she put a restraining order on me. She would call the police on me, and when my son would yell out, Mommy, Mommy, she would shut him up. The situation pissed me off so bad because why would you shut my son up if he clearly misses me? So I decided to kick the shit out of her door. Of course, she reports this, and I end up paying her in court for the damage to her door. So not only was my grandma refusing to let me see my child, but she also moved, and I had no idea where she moved to. So now I'm freaking out because if anything were to happen to my baby, I don't even know where he is. This was such a hard time for me. It did help having a loving and supportive boyfriend who knew the situation and saw how fucked up she was treating me. It's hard telling people about my grandma because people always ask me like, what did you do to her? Nothing. But I get it. It's hard to believe that a person could be this fucked up to someone who has been nothing but nice and loving to her. But that's just my grandma though. She's truly evil and she needs to heal internally. Her mindset is fucked up for real. But you can't tell her shit. If you tell her she's in the wrong about anything, she will get mad and retaliate against you. It's my grandma's way or the highway. And if you weren't a part of her evilness and trying to fuck people's lives up, she don't want to fuck with you. I remember when my grandmother called the DMV on my type 1 diabetic mom and claimed she was a danger to herself and my little brother at the time. Do you know that this bitch suspended my mom's driver's license? It was fucked up because my brother had a heart condition and my mother always had to take him to the hospital. And to this day, my mother still isn't licensed because of my grandma. Do you know my aunt and my grandmother laughed so hard when they discovered her license was suspended? And when little me tried to tell them that their actions were mean, I'm the one that ended up on punishment. I've always been kind-hearted and genuinely wants what's best for people. And honestly, I don't know where this comes from because some of the evilest bitches raised me. So you see how evil and petty my grandma is? So I know she finds this whole custody thing with my son comical. She knows I love my son and I don't play when it comes to him because I told her that. It has now been 8 years since I've talked to my grandmother. It took me like 2 years just to get DCFS to add my visitation rights on my order. I had to argue with my own attorney about not having the visitation written in the order. And when she saw it wasn't on there, I'm sure she felt stupid. My DCFS attorney is a lesbian bitch that I swear don't like me. She doesn't fight for me in court, but the attorneys on my grandma's side go hard for her, which is also why this case has been so complicating for me. Once I finally was able to get the visitation order on paper, I was able to finally use my only option to seeing my son, paying a monitor. So for the last 6 years, I've been paying a monitor every Sunday, $80 to see my child. I've been making sure I've been having a 2-bedroom just to prove to the court that I can take care of my child if he was in my custody. Nothing. They take almost a year to respond to my plea to reopen the case, and they deny it. See, back when my grandmother told me to close the case, she said that it would be easy to reopen, but she lied to me. I did have a break though when they decided to come to my 1-bedroom low-income apartment in LA. However, my grandma claimed I belittled him for being autistic, and according to the report, my apartment wasn't suitable enough for my child, and they denied me. I am never giving up, and I'm fighting for my son no matter what. My child sees that I fight for him and how I pay to see him every week. I'll do anything for my son, and I'm hoping that my new careers take off and put me in an even better position to get in custody of him, because once I do get the custody, I want to be able to give my son the life he deserves. I know y'all have heard of the popular proverb, blood is thicker than water, but how many of y'all share blood with ones that are out to betray you? Y'all see what the hell I be going through with my quote-unquote blood. If you like me with a family like this, how do we make sense of this and what should we do? It is important to always remember that your self-worth is not tied up in the relationships you have with your family members. Focus on all the positive, non-blood related relationships that you have with people instead. Also, know when it is time to let go of a relationship that no longer serves you. There will be times when a relationship may be too toxic for you to handle. You don't owe anyone blind loyalty. Focus on what's best for your mental well-being. I just recently decided to cancel my parents. Why? Because I was tired of trying to build a relationship with these pathetic punks. I was tired of begging for apologies from them or having this illusion that they weren't bad parents. What's crazy is my mom called me a few days ago, right? I haven't talked to her in some months. I've been really working on the Pink Parley. She had no idea about the podcast, right? So she reached out to me after so long. You know what? I decided to send her the podcast. What does she do? She's like, all right, I'll look at it later. She decides to call me, right? And she talked to me for probably oh my God, a whole hour about herself, right? Just about herself. And I wasn't even talking, y'all. I'm literally just silent because I really wanted to cuss her the fuck out. But I was like, you know what? I have a different coping mechanism now. I'm a writer now. So that's dope because I love the fact that I could just take out all my pain and just writing something, and then bam, I just feel so much better. I never knew how therapeutic writing was for me, but yes, not only is it delusional as fuck, but that shit has been eating at me my whole life. So you know what? I let them go. I've been fine on my own for this long. I honestly do not need them. They can't help me in life. All they do is remind me of the hurt, pain, and trauma I have for them. So why hold on? It may be fucked up to y'all, but on some real shit, where I'm at in life, anybody that's even sly of being negative can get the fuck away from me. I have held on to so many toxic relationships that hurt me and put me in a depressive state, and ever since I let they ass go, I feel so much better. My soul feels free, and I feel the fuck good, and that's what matters most. So if y'all holding on to no good family members that are preying on your downfall, hurting you, and hindering you from your success, you may need to distance yourself from that family member for real. This is one of the most touchiest subjects for me to talk about, and I'm sharing it with y'all just because this is a huge issue, and I know I can't be the only one in this position that is getting screwed over by my own people who is abusing their custody rights to put a gap between my son and I's relationship. No parent ever wants to be in a situation where they have to fight for custody. Having your child in the DCFS court system is the most painful situation any parent and child can go through. A lot of people don't even realize the emotional impact and agony this does to the affected families. There are so many people that are not getting any support from the courts, and the attorneys they assign on the cases are almost impossible to get a hold of. Mine never returns my calls or even answers her phone. Another common issue I have with the court is they primarily make decisions on what is quote unquote best for the child, rather than what is best for their entire family as a unit. This alone leaves me and other parents feeling unsupported, ignored, and unsure of how we can move forward. At this point, every time I file, it's denied with no explanations or statements. It's like the judge doesn't even look at it, and it's extremely frustrating, y'all. I know plenty of people going through this, and just know, even though you may feel alone, you're not. There's really some good people out here getting fucked over by some petty ass bitches, and it's ultimately fucking up not only the parents, but most importantly, the kids. You got men out here that do more for the kids than the mother, yet damn near half this man's check is getting snatched just because the court favored the mother. The court favors my grandma. Although she's evil, she's never been to jail, she's a registered nurse, so in the court's eyes, she's an angel. When it comes to me, I've been mentally diagnosed and considered quote unquote mentally unstable by the court. And I have a criminal record, so they judge me. I haven't even been in trouble for anything in over 8 years. Yet the court still doesn't want to hear a bitch out on this damn progress I'm making. You guys, it's just so frustrating. And for anyone that's out there that's really loving your kids and doing what you can for them, and the court's got you in a fucked up situation with your kids, never give up fighting. I've been fighting so long that I only have about 7 years left before my son is an adult. And I'm really hoping my life can just change, mainly through this podcast, because it's almost all the hope I have. But keep fighting for your kids, because no matter how much of a hardship it is on you, it's important that your kids see you fighting for them. Our kids are smarter than you think. I think too many of us get so heartbroken and overwhelmed that we just give up. I've told myself numerous times I give up while flooding in my tears and distraught. And this is when my mindset wasn't so strong. But even then, I'll wipe my tears and know that I can't give up, and I won't give up. My son looks forward to me every single week, so I make sure I see him every week. Dealing with child protective services is disheartening for families, and the court's lack of support can leave many people wanting to give up. And a lot of times you may feel alone or feel embarrassed about your situation. The court would make you jump through so many hoops that makes no sense, but we gotta make those hoops if we want to win. There are programs and legal aid assistance for open cases, and it's best as parents we find those resources and utilize them the best way possible. The court won't always tell you about the assisted programs or free attorneys like Levin and Quinn that assist in getting your kids back. No matter how difficult the situation may seem, it is important to remain hopeful and focus on how you and your family can recover from this experience. Dealing with child protective services can be a trying experience, but having resources and support can make the process less daunting. Today, I shared the story about my grandma and the hell she's been putting me through for many years. Not all grandmas bake cookies. Some are mean and haters and prey on your downfall like mine. Ultimately, it's important to remember that blood is not necessarily thicker than water. We should always strive to have healthy relationships with our family members regardless of any estrangement. You can have an obligation to your family and still want to stay away from certain relatives when it's necessary. It's okay to remove yourself from toxic relationships and distance yourself from people that hurt you. Everyone deserves healthy relationships in their lives, and above all else, we should prioritize our own health and well-being first. Additionally, we don't need to completely isolate ourselves from other people in our lives that aren't related to us by blood. We can form strong, meaningful relationships with those outside of our family, like friends and colleagues. Those relationships can be just as meaningful and provide us with just as much support as our family members. I also share my story about the DCFS system and the tough battles I've had with the system. I want to strongly encourage all parents who are in this situation to fight for their children. The court system is not always fair, and there is favoritism that takes place. I know that it can be hard to fight, but it is so important to do so, especially for the sake of your children. They are watching what is happening, and if you don't take a stand, your kids will start to believe all the negative things that may have been said about you. The favoritism and the discrimination from the courts happens far too often, and it seriously needs to be addressed. I don't know how to go about it, but I would love to have a billion-man march up at that raggedy-ass children's court collectively as parents who struggle to get justice on their cases. Maybe some of y'all can reach out to me and set this shit up at my email at bookings@thepinkparley.com. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'm uploading new episodes every Sunday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And don't be late to the parlay. Follow the Pink Parley on all social media. Take care, everyone, and I'll see y'all on the next episode.